Hey guys, welcome to week whatever this is, 6 or 7, I guess now in the official, maybe 8 now. I don't know.
It's actually 9. This is
9,
week 9.
9. So I know it's probably been a long one for y'all. It's been different for us. I'm wearing my college gear today because we were required, so I get to wear a hat at school. Thank you, Mr. Woods. And today we are talking about TV tropes. We're doing this one a little different. We're going to record and pre-record this because this assignment that comes with this video is a little complicated, and we want to make it available to just about every class because we think it'll be a lot of fun. So that's why we're doing this pre-recorded instead of live. So welcome to your pre-recorded lesson of the week.
And this week we are talking about TV tropes. In our unit discussing how TV is made, we're trying to cover three main things. We're trying to cover the different genres that you find in TV. We're trying to cover the technical ways that TV is produced as opposed to film, because it is quite different. And then the third thing we want to cover, and I think the most fun and interesting thing, is TV tropes. And what a trope is either a character or a sequence of events or a thing that occurs commonly in media of all types. So there are tropes in movies and there's tropes in TVs, and a lot of times they're the same, but there are some really common TV tropes, especially when you start talking about things like sitcoms and children's TV. It's the same sorts of characters and the same sorts of stories continue to show up over and over again, and those are called tropes. So that's what we're talking about today, and we're just kind of going to go back and forth, and we're going to talk to you about 25. We're going to try and get through 25 different tropes, and this will be the foundation of the assignment that you will be videoing. So
Yeah.
we're going to just go ahead and get started.
I got an interesting anecdote. The origin of the word trope actually comes out of music, music history, with opera. They would create these little segments in churches in the Middle Ages, and those segments of music were called tropes. And the most famous trope of all time is the Easter trope, which many people still practice today if you're Catholic or a Protestant in the religion. So the word trope itself means a little bit of musical interlude, and that has now been absorbed through all of media and content. So just a fun anecdotal side fact. All right, here we
I was
go.
not aware of that. That's pretty good. All right, let's start with number one, Mr. Carter. Number one.
The very first TV trope we're going to talk about today is the bottle episode, right? And the bottle episode is a piece of TV where all of the characters are forced to exist in a single location. I think the most common one I've seen regularly is like stuck in an elevator, right? For the entire piece of television, they're all trapped in a location and they can't get out for whatever reason. But the elevator to me is like the most common go-to bit of comedy. And then of course they like stuff other things in the elevator to heighten the intensity, like for example, a pregnant woman, right? Or somebody that has severe anxiety of being in closed spaces. So that's a really common bit of theater too. We see that all the time. Why can't they leave the room?
And one of the practical reasons that bottle episodes are so common and so popular is because it's a huge money-saving technique as far as the production goes, because you use one set, and commonly it's a set that you already have and that you already use for other episodes. So you have one set, you have everybody, the people who are trapped in the set or they can't leave are the characters that you normally have in the show anyway, so you're not having to pay for additional characters or extras or guest stars or anything like that. So it's a huge money-saving technique. And I have an interesting anecdote in terms of bottle episode that actually comes from the original Star Trek series from the 60s, because most of those shows would occur on the ship with the main crew. Or a lot of them, I won't say most, but it was the same group of actors and on the same sets day after day after day after day in multiple episodes. So the crew started to call it's a ship in a bottle episode. because they almost like they were contained in this bottle and couldn't get out. So that's actually where it came from, and then it just became the term that we use for all these plays and TV shows that are confined to a single location.
Yeah, I think common kids bottles or like trapped in a walk-in freezer. We've seen that a couple times where people get stuck in a walk-in freezer and they're trying to stay warm. If you watch Fuller House, you can see almost all the tropes we talk about show up in the new example of Fuller House because it's a compressed television series and they use all of them. So they use the freezer. I've seen people locked in a bathroom. You know, they're grounded. The kids are grounded, so they're not allowed to leave. And so then the kids just have to stay in the room, all that kind of stuff. So that's it. Bottle episode. Okay, number 2, physical comedy played for cheap laughs. This one also is pretty self-explanatory. When anybody gets hurt or does any sight gag or physical gag, like gets a pie in the face for an immediate cheap laugh, that's a physical comedy. I watched Even Stevens a lot as a child, and now it's interesting to see the movie Honey Boy that's come out talking about Even Stevens and his experiences as a kid being subjected to all this physical comedy and how that caused him some PTSD. So I don't know, that to me blows my mind, but you know, slip on a banana peel, all that kind of stuff, get a door smashed in your face, that's all physical comedy. You got anything for that, Mr. Lee?
Just that it's so common because it's easy. Like I think of the show America's Funniest Home Videos, right? That is majority just people getting hurt.
Yeah.
It's a cheap, easy laugh. So you see it so often in sitcoms. And a lot of the tropes that we talk about are, as Mr. Carter's already mentioned, commonly going to appear in sitcoms that are aimed at children or families because you go for what we call the lowest common denominator. So we want everybody to understand what's happening and everybody to get the joke. And everybody can get a joke when an anvil falls on your head. Everybody can laugh at the misfortune if that physical comedy is played for laughs. So it's easy to get everybody sort of roped in and together on that.
I do think it's important to mention with physical comedy and clowning, the clown is never supposed to suffer real injury. Though the reason it's funny, right, is because they're not actually hurt at the end. That's also why America's Funniest Home Videos works, is because when those people slip and fall, they always get up. Or like when the avalanche of snow falls onto their head when they close the door, we know that person is okay. If there is real injury, or like in a drama where someone really gets hurt and we expect them to actually be injured, the comedy is lost. So if you're doing this particular trope, you have to make sure that the clown is okay at the end, right? That's kind of the rule of the coyote. He doesn't matter what you do to him, he's always okay.
Hey! Oh!
All right, Mr. Lee, take us away. Number 3.
Right. Yeah. So next one is this is an interesting one. It's called coconut superpowers. So coconut superpowers is something that you often see in TV where there's a supernatural element. So somebody has some sort of magical or supernatural power. So think about like moving things with your mind or reading minds or something like that. And the reason why coconut superpowers are the kinds of superpowers that show up most often is because they're cheap and easy. It's going to be a lot harder to see a superhero who turns himself into flame, or a superhero that has a $1 billion suit of armor. It's going to be hard to see that in a TV show because that's a lot of expense. And TV is, because it's serialized and because it happens over the course of multiple episodes, you have to keep budgets down. So the coconut superpower is something that you see often in TV, a superpower that can be easily replicated. Like moving things with your mind can be done with editing tricks, with an invisible wire hanging on something. Telepathy is easy. You just like hold your fingers to your head, and then you say a line of dialogue that means you're reading somebody else's mind. So these are really easy superpowers that are replicated. The word coconut is used anytime there is a super cheap effect in TV. So that's why they're called coconut superpowers. But the word coconut, that comes from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is a movie where they didn't have a budget for horses. So the actors pretended to ride on horses, and another person behind them banged together coconuts to make it sound like the horses were galloping. So that's where that term comes from. And of course, that was played for laughs. Everybody knew that, it was a cheap effect, but that's where that term comes from. So coconut superpowers, really easy to recreate in independent film and in television. Because
that reminds me of The Good Witch. Have you seen The Good Witch on the Hallmark Channel? She has like primitive.
No, I have not.
Yeah, so you don't really actually see anything. She notices something like Psych, right? Another example, I guess, of this where Psych, he's just really good at observing stuff, so everybody thinks he's psychic, right? And then they like make things glow. Yeah, that's interesting. Cool.
And that's all just done with, again, simple editing tricks give you these superpowers. It doesn't take, CGI or a huge set piece or a specialized prop or anything like that. So there you go. Coconut superpowers. That was number 3.
Yeah. Number 4, Mr. Lee.
So this is a limited social circle. Limited social circle is common in TV shows and in television because you have the same reoccurring characters every time. So what it looks like is these are the only people that the characters in the show are friends with, and they do everything together. They go to dinner together. They go to movies together. They are constantly hanging out in each other's apartments or at the coffee shop down the street. They're always together. Sometimes this is obviously used in terms of family. They get a family together, and so the family is your limited social circle, and they do everything together. But oftentimes, most famously, probably in the show called Friends, the friends are always hanging out together. Or think about Big Bang Theory, which is a more recent example. All these friends are constantly hanging out together, and they don't really seem to have other friends that they do things with. That isn't how reality works. We have different groups of friends. We may spend some time with one group of friends and then spend some time doing something vastly different with another group of friends. But in reality, in the reality of the TV world, it looks like this tight circle of friends does everything together all the time.
Number 5, breaking the fourth wall. We have an advantage knowing what the fourth wall is already because we do performing arts, right? But the idea of the fourth wall is that there is a barrier between the actor on the camera, right, and the audience. So if you look in my office right now, I have a wall over here, a wall behind me, and then a wall to the side over here, right? There's 3 walls in a set. And then the fourth wall is the lens of the camera. So if I'm acting with Mr. Lee and I'm speaking to him, and then I decide to take a joke out into the audience to break the fourth wall, I look at the camera. That's called mugging the audience, right? I look at it and then I say a thing that's direct addressed to you, right? And that happens when a show is self-aware and is looking to create some type of comedy that is self-referential. The most recent one that I watched was in Fuller House. Again, when they remake Full House from a long time ago, and everybody comes back but the Olsen twins, right? And so in the very first episode, they're like, wow, we're so glad the gang's all here. Oh, except for Michelle. And it's very clear that they are making fun of the Olsen twins out there somewhere, right? And that happens all over the place, especially when a character finds himself in jeopardy, and they're like, "Wow, well, how did this happen? What do you think?" Right? And it pulls it out to there. So that to me is why it's used regularly. You got anything to add for that?
I think it's interesting that we the breaking the fourth wall is something that happens in TV sort of intermittently and whenever they feel like it. But there are also shows that are sort of based on this concept that the fourth wall is broken all the time. As Mr. Carter said, the characters are self-aware. They know they're actors in a TV show, so they can look at the audience like that. And there are some shows that do that almost constantly. I think of the show Scrubs that has this sort of hyper-aware narration throughout the whole show and the entirety of the series, and they break the fourth wall all the time, anytime they feel like it. There are some shows like Fuller House, they may just do it that one time, but that's why it's a trope, right? Because it appears that one time in that show and in 1,000 other shows. So it can be sort of the basis of a character or a show, or it can be a one-off. I know we're not talking about movies, but Deadpool is a great example.
Oh yeah.
If you've seen that movie, of a character that breaks the fourth wall. And he also does that in the original comic books. So he's known for that. That's like his thing. But sometimes it can just be a moment that breaks the fourth wall. So
yeah,
pretty common.
It's not the actors breaking the wall. It's the cameraman or like the cinematographer or the storyteller. So I would think of like Leslie Nielsen, who was an old comic in like the Naked Gun series. And he's in an office and something happens outside of his office and everybody runs through the door and he steps outside the wall of the set and walks around and then goes back in to the other side and the camera tracks him, but no word is ever said. And then we know, oh my God, okay, he's pretending like he's on a set. So that kind of stuff is really a gag.
If you ask me, everybody in this theater is a giant sucker, especially you.
If you look for it, you can see these little dots come into the upper right-hand corner of the screen.
Fourth wall break inside a fourth wall break. That's like 16 walls.
In the industry, we call them cigarette buttons.
Cool. Okay. Number 6. This is Mr. Lee's "And knowing is half the battle," and Aesop.
So, and knowing is half the battle is a term that is called on the TV Tropes Wikipedia, but probably the more common term is an Aesop. And an Aesop means at the end of the show, you have a moment where a lesson is learned. So the entire show leads up to the lesson, the mistakes that the character makes, and the lies that they tell, and everything sort of come to a head, and there's a moment where a lesson is learned.
And that Aesop. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Aesop's Fables blows into my head. Right, as a kid, I read that whole series. Yeah. So if you have never read Aesop's Fables, check it out.
Yeah, it's the children's tales that again teach them an important life lesson. So that's where the term an Aesop comes from. But the knowing is half the battle comes from one of my favorite cartoons when I was a kid, which was G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe would have a whole episode, and G.I. Joe would defeat the evil forces of Cobra, and then at the end they would just have a PSA. It had nothing to do with the show. It was just a PSA stuck right at the end. And we're going to show you one. And then at the end,
welcome back.
And at the end of every one, they say, "And knowing is half the battle," because the kid goes, "And now I know." And then the G.I. Joe.
I remember that. And then there's like the stars and the rainbow. And yeah.
Is your mom there?
No, I'm home alone.
Well, you won a prize. What's your address?
42 Oak Street. Hey, Roblox, some stranger's bringing me a prize.
A stranger, huh? All he wanted to bring you was trouble. Remember, never tell anyone you're home alone, and never give anyone your address.
I'll say Mom can't come to the phone.
Smart thinking.
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe! Oh, man. Okay, and that brings us to number 7, which is everybody laughs at the end. And that is exactly as it sounds. So you could set up whatever kinds of craziness you want. And then when it is all done, buddy number 1 looks over to buddy number 2 and says something that's either funny or not, but everybody laughs at the end. Like, boy, that was cold. James Bond is pretty famous for that kind of stuff. He has these quips that causes the break in tension. I feel like Family Guy does it all the time to make fun of the trope. So their everybody laughs at the end is fake laughter, and that brings them out of the gag to sort of make fun of the mid-90s kind of. So that one really go ahead, yeah.
That one and the really the Aesop and the next one that we're going to talk about is super 90s TV, because again, let's go back to the example of Full House. There's a moment at the end of almost every Full House episode where the kids are sat down and they learn a lesson. So there's an Aesop, and then they'll crack a joke at the end and everybody laughs, which is a signal to the audience that everything is okay. So when you end that episode, you know that everyone is okay. So you can move on to the next episode. And honestly, most of the time, the problem that happened in the previous episode completely has disappeared. It doesn't matter anymore. And that laughter is sort of a symbol of that.
The thing I always remember and that is almost always brought up when I watch any type of documentary about television or film, the movies that made us or the TV shows that made us and all those kinds of things, is the thing that shifted our ideas behind like this positive, we're all going to learn and really be happy and life is good. The defining time period and shift was actually 9/11, right? So when our like idea of the world and everything being good was okay, 9/11 changed that social perspective, and that's when television shows began to explore much more gritty, violent, and darker themes. So that's really like if you looking for tropes to match this, 9/11, 2001, one way or the other is where you want to go. Right? Okay.
And if it happens now, it's like you said, Mr. Carter, it's kind of they're making fun of it now. It's not a typical thing we see anymore.
Yeah, I imagine that there's probably they will come around again in an honest way. I just don't think we're there yet. Yeah, there will probably be a show that actually does it for real because they're actually upbeat and uplifted. So that brings us to number 8, which is freeze frame at the end. Mr. Lee's got this one.
Yeah, so I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like as well. At the end of the show, whatever is occurring, everybody just freezes. And it's just it's that indication to the audience that, okay, the show is over, it has stopped. Oftentimes they freeze frame and then they run the credits over it. Seinfeld was, again, a great 90s example of the freeze frame at the end. They did a freeze frame at the end of every one of their episodes, and here are some of them. So as you can see, it's the same ending, or it's the same ending credits, right? But it's a different freeze frame at the end of the episode. And it's just like whatever action was taking place, the camera freezes. Yeah. And obviously, a lot of times it is played for laughs, but sometimes it's played for dramatic effects too. That was more common in the 70s. That was sort of a thing that became very popular in the 70s, that freeze frame.
That makes cliffhangers, right? When you have a freeze frame where like the guy walks in and there's a look of shock and then, cliffhanger. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I recall, I guess probably Kramer opens the door and his chest hair is all popping out and Jerry's like, Yeah, that's that kind of stuff. Good, yeah. Freeze frame.
Yeah, that we played is literally a montage of every single freeze frame from the entire series.
And
A part of
there's also a song out that came out about freeze frame. Freeze frame, freeze frame, freeze frame.
freeze frame.
And that's basically because it was so prevalent. And number 9, comic relief / the dumb best friend. So Mean Girls is super popular as a movie, and the idea of having a friend that just is slower than everyone else and doesn't get it is another common TV trope. So when you put social circles together, there's almost always a friend that is a little slower, and that is almost always played for laughs. They don't quite get it, or they misunderstand, and those misunderstandings lead to other circumstances that are funny. So you have to be careful with the dumb one to not go too dumb, because then they're not relatable to the audience. Right? And then normally they're also very kind-hearted. If they're mean and dumb, then the comedy doesn't always play right? So the idea here is they're a kind, warm friend, but just a little slow, right? Anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I just think that if you honestly think about the shows that you watched as a kid, animated or live action, this is constant. When my kids were little, they watched a show called iCarly all the time. And the brother in that, the older brother, was a complete dullard. He didn't get it. He was slow on the uptake. He did really weird things. Patrick in SpongeBob is probably the ultimate example of
that's a perfect example, yeah.
So you just think about a show, and if you think about it long enough, you're going to identify the dumb best friend, because it is such a common trope. And it comes from a comic relief, and a Falstaff comes from Shakespeare. That's another name for it. So it comes from the ancient history of theater. That's why we see it literally everywhere in television. The next one.
Yes,
is number 10. So we continue to talk about the types of personalities that characters exhibit in TV, and you'll find that they become very common. The perfectionist is another one. Sometimes it's played as the villain, and sometimes it's played as just a difficult best friend. And sometimes they're the main character, but they're obsessed with doing everything perfectly. There's another TV trope that deals with the perfectionist, that is like the report card comes out and the perfectionist made a B, and that's like the end of their world. There's all this emotional fallout because they can't believe they didn't have perfect straight A's. So the perfectionist is a very typical character that comes up again and again. The example I want to show you really quick is Leslie Knope from the series Parks and Recreations. She has a plan for everything. She has binders that are dedicated to, the smallest little things in her life. So she overplans everything. And that is an example of a perfectionist. And that's sort of a defining characteristic of her character. And you often find that in TV shows as well. Sometimes the annoying little sister is a perfectionist. She does everything perfectly, and she always dresses well, and she makes great grades, and that's annoying to the main protagonist. That's the basic idea of the perfectionist.
Like the Brady Bunch, which probably no one watches anymore. Marcia and Jan have this never-ending like battle about, oh, Marcia's so perfect and Jan is just not good enough. Yeah. Okay, number 11. All right, you ready? Sesquipedalian loquaciousness, otherwise known as the smart one. And I think there is no finer example of this particular trope than right now in the TV show Schitt's Creek. SCHITTS, Schitt's Creek, right? And that's with the mother character who is constantly using vocabulary that is well beyond anyone else in the entire series. And so I'll show you a couple of those clips, and you can hear how someone who is able to speak circles around other people can elicit comedy and laughter. This is the finest script I have read in a long time. Have you watched it, Mr. Lee?
And that is a great example because like I watch that show pretty much. That's one of my it's one of my go to sleep shows because I love it so much, right? Yeah. And I've seen it so many times. But yeah, Moira Rose she uses completely bombastic verbiage at every available opportunity.
Yeah, it's with the intention
for no reason.
Trying to talk, she's just trying to prove that she's better than everybody else. And then, so if you move away from that, right? So again, that's a current example of really good language, and you move into like someone who's not doing it to be funny, but it's like embedded in their character. I think Velma from Scooby-Doo is probably the cleanest example.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the one that everyone would go to as like an old school smart person, but I think now Schitt's Creek has definitely commandeered that trope and uses it really well. SCHITTS. I have to say that, so because this is going out in public. All right.
Whenever they're interviewed from that show on late night talk shows, they have to put the title on the
costume designer Stan Lecoyer. I'm sure he'd agree this toggery is the perfect tribute to the common woman. Oh, John, look. It's our car.
This car is $3,000 more than our budget.
I'm a trained actor. A humble backstory will disabuse this man of any notion we're too patrician.
Well, okay, but let's start by losing words like patrician. Hey, folks, how we doing today?
Oh, excited beyond compare.
We've struggled with penury for quite some time now. Just 2 years ago, we were...
All right, moving on. Number 12. This one's opposite siblings or twins. Mr. Lee, talk about
it. So I think that the best example I can use that will resonate with our students is The Sweet Life of Zach and Cody, where you have two twins that have very different personalities. Obviously, there are some things that are similar, but one is kind of the ladies' man and one is sort of the more academic one. And you see this constantly. The show Blackish, every sibling in that show sort of has a different thing. And one of them's like the cool popular one, and one of them's like the uptight smart one, which is one of the tropes that we just mentioned. So you get these opposing personalities, and you want those opposing personalities so you get the conflict when they interact with one another. Again, very common in shows that have. There's a great old example that nobody will understand called the Patty Duke Show, where Patty Duke played two cousins that looked alike but were completely different, and the theme song sings about how different they are, which is kind of absurd in modern TV standards. But anyway, that is a very common trope. Modern Family, that's another current TV show that uses that with the siblings. The sisters in particular in Modern Family are very different.
All right, number 13. I know everyone can probably think of some example of this already. This is super common. Nerd girl or guy suddenly becomes attractive or hot, right? Whether that's through a makeover or some act of heroism, that is present all over the place. And I mean, they built movie after movie on that idea as well. She's all that. kind of the idea is you take Wicked has got that in there, right? If you think about even in Broadway, Glinda and Elphaba, and Glinda's like, I'm going to give you a makeover, and then suddenly you're going to be super hot, or like your hair's all mussy, and then boom. What's the Hollywood actress's name that is always the police officer that always goes undercover to do the beauty pageants and stuff?
Sandra Bullock.
Yeah. That's like her bread and butter cliche is to look unattractive at the beginning and then be super, super hot at the end. Yeah.
In television, we often find this as like the plot of a single episode. So maybe the nerdy one that becomes attractive isn't like a regular character, but they show up for this episode and they suddenly go from, the nerd who's pushing up their glasses and dropping their books in the hallway to like the love interest at the end of the episode. So a lot of times it's a one-off.
Yeah, Cobra Kai's Hawk, his character Hawk, he's a good example of that, where he's got like a cleft lip and everyone's making fun of him, and all of a sudden he starts doing karate and he gets the hot dumb girl in the trope. So there you go. Yeah.
Very common one.
Yep. Number 14.
Okay, we don't see this as much anymore. We still see it in kids shows, but the trope is amnesia. Number 14 is amnesia. It's sort of hilarious because it is not at all how amnesia works. But you see very often, especially in cartoons and TV shows aimed at children, where somebody gets a bump on the head and they forget who they are. It's also a common trope in soap operas. Soap operas are a whole genre of TV, which we'll discuss, but that's a very common trope because you got this familiar character that suddenly doesn't remember anyone or anything that they've done. So that sets up opportunities for drama and for comedy. I'm going to bring back Full House again and watch this clip from Full House. So Michelle falls off a horse and loses her memory. And that's the plot of the episode. Now, I think you probably understand by now that by the end of the episode, Michelle's going to be fine and remember everything. But that idea drives that entire episode. So it can be a one episode like that Full House example, or that amnesia can continue for several episodes, or even be an arc for an entire season of a show where the character is trying to regain their memory.
Sorry, in Arrow, that's the plot of like season 1 of Arrow, is he doesn't know where he's from. He's trying to figure out. That's on Netflix too. Check it out.
Yeah, there you go.
Hi, honey. How do you feel?
Okay, but my head hurts.
Look, sweetie, you had an accident, and you fell off your horse, and you hit your head. I'm so sorry I put so much pressure on you.
That's okay. Who are you?
Michelle, it's Daddy.
Okay, you're Daddy, so I must be Michelle.
Doctor, what's going on here? She's completely out of it. Well,
okay, the red herring, number 15. If you are a Scooby-Doo watcher, red herring is actually a character in Scooby-Doo where they always blame that guy for being the villain. And the idea behind the red herring is that it's meant to put you, the audience, off the track of who actually did the deed or whatever the misdeed, right? And so Fred always blames red herring, and Velma says, no, it's not red. It's actually so-and-so. but the red herring itself is like intentionally placed to move the blame to someone else. The attempt there is so you can't predict whomever the killer is. So any CSI, NCIS, crime investigation show will always drop a red herring to make you think it's somebody else, right? Psych does that, Monk does that. So that's really where I think you find it the most, is when they're trying to solve some kind of mystery or problem, and they discover clues, and the clue leads them in the wrong direction. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. I couldn't
That's
say
it.
it any
That's
better.
the red herring.
You occasionally see it.
A herring is a fish, right? And I don't know why. Is there a real word for the red herring? I know it's a fish. It's a red fish. That's the point. It's like the red fish did it. That's what
I think it's something like you chase the red fish, but while you're chasing to try and catch the red fish, you lose the other fish. I think that's
I'm not going to pull too much more out of it. Okay. Number 16.
Okay, so the simple misunderstanding. The simple misunderstanding is, again, an ancient idea. It occurs in ancient theater. It's a popular, super popular Shakespeare trope where somebody misunderstands a conversation, somebody misunderstands a character's intention, someone misunderstands a character's gender or identity. There's a mixed up identity. This is super common in, again, kids' TV shows where like they'll hear a conversation that maybe their parents are having and they misinterpret it. They think their parents are getting a divorce, or they think they're going to move, but that's not at all what their parents were talking about. That was just the misunderstanding of the character that we're following. And oftentimes, and this happens in movies too, characters will, it's like in romantic comedies or in TV shows that have a romance, they'll misunderstand each other or misunderstand their intentions, and they'll break up or they'll not talk to each other. And it's called a simple misunderstanding because most of the time, a simple explanation clears everything up, and there's no confusion and there's no conflict, and everybody can move on with their lives. But there's not a lot of drama there. So to keep that drama, you play that simple misunderstanding for all it's worth. So a whole episode is devoted to
every Hallmark Christmas movie.
Yes, right. Yeah, I mean it's so common. It's so it happens in the Marvel movies. It happens in all kinds of TV shows, especially when you're talking about character relationships. I think that's when it occurs most often, is the two characters misunderstand each other, and that leads to a fallout in their relationship that they then have to repair.
Manuel, there is too much butter on those trays. Okay? There is too much butter on those trays.
No, senor. What? Not on those trays. No, sir. Uno, dos, tres.
No. Hay mucho burro allí.
Okay?
Hay mucho burro allí.
Ah, mantequilla.
What? Okay?
Mantequilla. Burro is burro.
Manuel, por favor, momento.
Sí.
Nothing, dear, I'm just dealing with it.
We've got 25 of these in total, so we're going to break them up into 2 lessons because there's so much information, so many good examples that we're trying to present to you guys. So we're going to stop here, and this will be part 1. And in part 2, you'll see the rest of the tropes down to 25, and you will also get the assignment constraints